What was the best fiction I read in 2024? Hello, welcome to my channel, Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and I am going to be doing a series of 4 videos about the worst books, the best fiction, the best nonfiction, and the best rereads I did in 2024. I have already completed the worst books that I read, so now I want to get on to the best fiction that I read. Now, when I say I read the book in 2024, that does not mean that the book was published in 2024. In fact, very few of the books that are on these lists were published in 2024. They just happened to be the year that I read the book in. Except for the last 2 books on this list, I'm presenting these books in no particular order. It's sort of how I liked them when I was writing up the list that I put them on, but if you ask me tomorrow, I might rearrange the order just a little bit. I am also going to try to get through this list relatively quickly. I am not going to be giving an in-depth analysis on the book or too much of a plot line. I just want to give my opinions of sort of why I liked these books. I'm going to start off this list with a little bit of a cheat. I'm going to be presenting a trilogy. Technically, I read the first book in this trilogy in 2023, but the trilogy is really just one long book split up into 3 volumes due to length, and that is the Final Architecture trilogy by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky is rising in my estimation as a science fiction author. This is a trilogy of just pure, enjoyable soap opera science fiction. It takes place in the far future, where humanity must battle a group of, let's just say, evil aliens, and you get to know the characters in these books, and you get to like them. You want to see what they're going to be doing in the next book. So I will not say The Final Architecture is the greatest science fiction that I've ever read, but it was such a pleasure to listen to these as audiobooks. As you get to the first, the second, and the third book, it's just pure enjoyment. The 7% Solution by Nicholas Meyer. This is a Sherlock Holmes pastiche novel. If you are not familiar what a pastiche novel is, it just means that Nicholas Meyer took the character of Sherlock Holmes and wrote his own story in this novel. This is not something that you want to pick up never having read a Sherlock Holmes story before. You do need to know the character. The title, The 7% Solution, comes from the beginning of The Sign of the Four, where you learn that Sherlock Holmes is a cocaine addict, and the 7% solution is his percentage of cocaine dilution that he takes. So Sherlock Holmes is a drug addict. You do need to know that. You also have to know the short story, The Final Program. That was the story where Doyle supposedly killed off Sherlock Holmes. Now, you need to read that story because this novel takes that story and reinvents it. It tells you what really happened in that story, and the story as Doyle wrote it, Nicholas Meyer saying, no, that's not what happened. Now, this also happens to be the first pastiche novel of Sherlock Holmes that I ever read. It was given to me by Jim at Mystery and Mayhem for Holmes is Where the Heart Is. That is an event that we read Sherlock Holmes in February, and I just really enjoyed this novel so much, except for the ending, which was a little too Hollywood-esque for me. Babel by R.F. Kuang. This is sort of a surprise inclusion on this list. I just read it the other week, and I was just kind of amazed that this book was so good. I was going into it thinking, oh, this will just be another fantasy novel. But it had a lot more depth than I was anticipating. On one part, it is a historical novel about Cambridge in the 1840s, and there is this tower known as Babel, where students go to learn the art of translation and magic, because magic does exist in this alternative historical England, where they work with silver and foreign languages. And not to get too complicated, knowledge of foreign languages and how to translate them is an important part of magic in this world. But it's also important in this novel because Kuang is talking about political issues that were relevant back in those days, but are still relevant today. How do we treat people? How do we treat immigrants? How important is language? And the language parts really amazed me. I'm not really fluent in a foreign language, but I have a spattering of Spanish and a little bit of French. So when she talks about how to translate languages and what words can mean in one language and how they are sort of the same in English, but not quite the same, particularly in Chinese, I found that utterly fascinating, and the storyline was very relevant, and the end really surprised me. Carpenter's Gothic by William Gaddis. He is more famously known for his novel The Recognitions, or J.R., but he is an underappreciated American master of the novel, I think. And this is a short little novel for William Gaddis. He usually writes 700 to 1,000 page novels, but this comes in at just under 300 pages. Now, the problem is this is a story of a man and a wife. Both of them are not telling the truth to each other or other people. And it's up to the reader to discover through their dialogue what actually happened. So you have to pay a lot of attention while reading this book. And I just was totally enamored with it. I don't think it is up to snuff of Recognitions or JR, but it's still a really good book. And if you do enjoy the Recognitions or JR, pick up Carpenter's Gothic. I think you will appreciate it. Bear by Marian Engel, known as the most scandalous book published in Canada. There is a woman writer who has to go off to a secluded island to go through a client's inventory of books. She is all alone on this island, or almost alone. There was a pet bear from the former owner, and she gets into a sexual relationship with the bear. But it is not a sex book. It is more about feelings, a woman's feelings for independence and what she can do with her life. And I found it really rather interesting. Gwen in Green by Hugh, Zachary. I read this for my 70s horror project. And as a 70s horror novel, it does show its age just a little bit. There is some not too subtle sexism in this book. But the story kind of fascinated me because it is a man and a wife who buy a piece of land next to what will soon be a nuclear plant. And there's going to be some radiation issues. Maybe. But it's not the radiation that is really the problem, because something else exists nearby. And this novel touches on what does it mean to be, let's just say a little bit of a spoiler, an alien intelligence, and what that alien intelligence will do to protect itself. Rhinoceros by Eugène. Ionesco. This is a metaphor for the coming of fascism to Europe. In the play, people are suddenly turning into a rhinoceros. Now, of course, turning into a rhinoceros is the metaphor for turning to fascism. And I think this play is incredibly relevant in today's political situation. Because instead of turning into a rhinoceros, I think you could turn this play and call it Red Hat The people all of a sudden just start wearing red hats. Yes, I am sort of revealing my political views, but that's important to this play, and I think it's important for everyone in the United States and maybe other countries to realize that anyone can turn into a rhinoceros or start wearing a red hat. From Hell by Alan Moore. This is the graphic novel that describes Alan Moore's idea of the identity for Jack the Ripper. I don't really buy his interpretation of who Jack the Ripper was, but it at least is a plausible idea, at least in some respects. But more than that, I kind of enjoyed Alan Moore's descent into the mind of Jack the Ripper, why he decided to kill women. And there's multiple reasons. And for whatever reason, I found it totally captivating and a very good graphic novel. I think there is a colorized version. I just have the black and white version. All the Fiends of Hell by Adam Nevill. This is a post-apocalyptic horror novel. The main character is a rather unassuming, unextraordinary British man named Carl. The story starts off after he's recovering from a bout of a very serious illness, where he was alone in his house for a number of days, rather feverish and sort of clueless to the world. And when he wakes up from this fever, this disease, he finds that most of the world's population has disappeared, and there are now monsters roaming the world. But what Nevill really does is he focuses his story just pretty much from this Carl's viewpoint. A British man, as I said, rather unextraordinary, without any major accomplishments in his life, and he must deal with this vastly changed world. And that's where I liked it a lot. He is not a kick-ass kind of character. There are too many post-apocalyptic stories where the main character is good with weapons, good with hand-to-hand fighting, very knowledgeable about what to do in the world. But Carl, he's a nothing burger, really. And yet he must learn to survive in this world with monsters. And that's where I think Adam Nevill really hit it out of the park with this novel. The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper. This is an historical novel set in Pompeii, beginning in the year 71. If you are familiar with history, you know that 7 or 8 years from when the story starts, Pompeii is going to suffer a catastrophe. But the story focuses on a young woman. She was the daughter of a doctor, and the doctor passed away without a lot of money, and the daughter was sold off to be a concubine, and then sold off to be a prostitute slave in Pompeii. And this is the story of her rising above her circumstances. And the young woman is very determined to get out of her situation. And even as a slave prostitute, she has a few options that she can finagle from the people with power. I liked it a lot. At parts of the book, I wanted just a little more historical detail, but maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe it's a good mix of character, story, and history, because I will be going on to the second book in this trilogy. Titanium Noir by Nick Harkaway. Nick Harkaway is the son of Jean le Carré. The family has quite some writing talent in it. And this novel is a mixture of science fiction and noir mystery. There are a race of mutants known as Titans. And the Titans are basically above the police. So the police have to hire a detective to solve what may be the murder of one of these mutant Titans. And I found the mixture of the science fiction and the detective story very well done. It is often quite difficult to mix genres like this, but Nick Harkaway got a real winner with this one. The Maniac by Benjamín Labatut. This is essentially 3 novellas together. The first novella talks about a German philosopher who killed his developmentally disabled son, then took his own life in suicide. But that professor taught John von Neumann. Von Neumann was very important in the development of the atom bomb and computers. Many people have heard about von Neumann machines. Those are a theory he created that would say that in the future, machines will be able to create other machines like themselves and improve upon that design. There is also a lot of math in this section about John von Neumann, math that goes way above my head, but it's not too far above my head because Labatut describes it in a way that I can understand at least the gist of this advanced mathematics. And the Maniac is a computer that von Neumann helped create. It was used in the World War II to develop the bomb. There is a third novella talking about the game of Go. Go is sort of like a Japanese version of checkers or chess, and it was theorized that a computer could never learn the game of Go because it is too intuitive, that only a human could do it. But the last section talks about how a computer defeats the greatest Go champions. The last book on this list is Les Misérables by Victor Hugo. This is one of the most famous novels ever written. It is huge. It is, in my English translation, over 1,400 pages long. But what an incredible epic this book is. I read it over a few months earlier this year, and I was captivated. Hugo does go into a lot of tangents, most famously about the Battle of Waterloo. But in his tangents, there is this intelligence and this importance that you think is not part of the story, but really is part of story and part of humanity. And this book rightly deserves its place as one of the greatest novels ever written, which is why I'm ranking it as the best work of fiction that I read in 2024. Okay, that is my list of best fiction that I read in 2024. Thank you for watching, and keep on reading.